implementation of e-governance initiatives undertaken by ministries and departments, both at the central and state levels. In his role at the NEGD division, Mr. Singh spearheads projects relating to digital India, such as DigiLocker, Umang, geoinformatics. He's also leading the efforts on the communications on COVID, and I want to thank you personally and stop here for the heroic work that you and your team have done while we had the luxury of working from home. I know that you braved the disease and were in office every day and lost some valuable colleagues. So my deep heartfelt gratitude to you and my homage to the ones we lost in that fight. Mr. Singh is a 1995 IAS officer from Nagaland cadre. He's also served as CEO of MyGov and MeitY between October 19 till very recently, February 2022. His master's in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government as a Mason Fellow in May 2013. Has a BTech and an MTech from IIT Kanpur. So you could have posed questions in Hindi, and he'll answer equally easily. His experience ranges from Nagaland to Uttar Pradesh and now in the National Capital Region in important central government roles. So your experience of policy making to enable the use of technology for better governance is extremely valuable. There could be no better person to give us an insight into the topic of today's discussion. India's active internet user and data consumption is expected to increase many fields in the coming years, and government's digital inclusion, including technological advancements such as 5G, which we hope to see by 2023 implemented in India, if not earlier. The data generated will offer enormous opportunities for citizens, businesses, government, better governance, efficient service delivery and innovation in critical sectors, while the government is in the process of putting together an overall data protection framework for the country. What we see before us is an opportunity to leverage data and to make it a cornerstone of societal and economic transformation. There is recognition that India's ambition of becoming a $5 trillion digital economy requires its ability to harness the value of data and digital in general. The government is looking to make legislations that are future-proof and catalyst to the digital economy. In this view, the unlocking of robust data sharing ecosystem by maximizing access, which is secure to and the use of public sector data is critical as a task lies ahead. There could be no better time for the government of India to release the data accessibility use policy. It aims at enhancing the access and use of data in line with technology needs of this decade. The policy applies to all data that is generated and collected by the government and contemplates making data open by default, subject to certain exceptions, of course. Excuse me. It envisages seamless government-to-government data sharing and integration. The policy lays down an institutional framework for its implementation, an India Data Office, data management units, India Data Council to streamline data access and sharing of policy data. The policy also outlines certain challenges with data sharing and use, such as monitoring, enforcement, data discoverability, and intergovernmental data sharing, soil data platforms, amongst others. Excuse me. Today's discussion on data accessibility and use and socio-economic development comes in the backdrop of MeitY having invited industry's feedback on the said policy. It makes it very timely. Mr. Singh, let me take a moment to introduce PAFI, which I'm sure you already know, before we invite you for your keynote. PAFI started in the year 2008 as an informal platform for public policy professionals. In 2012, it was formally registered under the Societies Act, and today has over 80 companies as members and growing very fast, associations across multiple sectors. PAFI has been at the forefront of driving ethical, transparent, evidence-based interactions with the government, such as this, and with industry, media, academia, and other stakeholders of the economy. Given your role at the NEGD plays to enable use of technology for better governance, we are fortunate to have you here. Again, I'm very thankful that you chose to take this call from the car. With this, may I invite you? Would you like to start your keynote address from the car, sir, and then we can continue when you reach your office? Could you hear everything I said, sir?
Yes, I could hear very well, in fact. And thank you, Virat, for summing up the policy and all the details in such a clear manner. In fact, the objective for what I was looking forward to this call was that maybe spell out what we are trying to do with regard to the consultation of the data governance policy and get feedback with regard to what needs to be done more or what needs to be done differently or what are the or is there something that we're missing out, because the whole strategy for or the reason for launching the data governance policy is because we do feel that if we feel that the government holds a lot amount of data. It's in any sector that we see, whether it's healthcare or agriculture or education or mobility, logistics, we have enormous amounts of data, and very often we are not able to share that data because we are not sure of many things. We did have the NADISAP, the National Data Sharing and Accessible Policy 2012 notified, which was which mentioned a lot of things, like every government data will classify its data sets into open, restricted, or on the negative list. Then they will ensure that all data sets will be released on the open data platform and made accessible to everyone. It also came up with a policy of monetizing data, in the sense that the department should price data sets which they felt that are high value and which can for which there might be a bit of demand. But somehow that policy, it's almost 10 years, but there have been, it's not about gov.in portal, which has got more than 500. We found several gaps in them. Like, for example, for several data sets, we found that the entire time series of data was missing, or there were certain states for which data was missing. So it was felt that it's very important to ensure that whenever we are publishing a data set or making it available and accessible, it has to be complete in all formats. It has to be made available so that any researcher or any entrepreneur or any startup, if they want to build a solution based on that, they should be able to make use of it. Then the other gap that we found is that most departments do not really have access to data anonymization tools and privacy preservation tools. And with this entire risk that if we are holding any data which has got personal identifiable attributes, and if there are certain privacy components involved there, then how do you kind of make it open? Will you be, even though we are still waiting for the data privacy bill to become a law, but still if there are personal data attributes, that can you put it on open data portal or not? And if you want to put the aggregate data, then how do you kind of strip off the privacy components and use the data anonymization tools? So that capacity was also lacking in many government departments. Then we also found that like many departments did not really have a data retention policy. Like whenever you're holding a data, for how long you should be doing that? How so? Long and short of it is that like the institutional framework for enforcing the data policy, whether the anti-SAP or the existing. So one intervention that this new policy that we have put up seeks to do is to set up the institutional framework of one India Data Office, which will oversee the implementation of the policy. And along with that, we've come up with something called India Data Council, which will be nothing but kind of a group of data officers led by MeitY, the India Data Officer, and the chief data officers of 5 departments, of the key departments who will be members of the India Data Council, and some data officers of the states if they're also willing to. Because a lot of data is also held by the state governments. So that institutional framework has been kind of conceptualized with an objective of looking into all aspects related to data, especially the data standards, metadata standards, the formats in which the data will be made available, operationalization of a data exchange platform, like wherein owners, data generators will be publishing the data for, and then data consumers or those who read through that data, they will be harnessing the data that is made available there. So the India Data Office will be kind of the overall body which will look into this entire gamut of this policy implementation, and then it will also set up the data exchange platform, which will ensure easy data exchange for all components. It will also take up a lot of work in data analytics in order to ensure that some insights that come from data can be used and given for further policy formulation. For example, we get a lot of data from healthcare. with regard to disease surveillance and that kind of data can actually the particular ministry department should be taking at various levels. So that was one key. One second, I will just be getting into my lifts and I will just join back from my office. So give me a minute to just get into that. The network will go. 1 second.
Ladies and gentlemen, just bear with us because we had expected this transition while he gets across. He might even disconnect and come in from a different piece of equipment, but hopefully soon.
In the meanwhile, if there are any questions, please type in the Q&A box. So
In this chat, I can see
yeah.
4. Okay, that's all about. There's a warning from Lakshmi that she's going live on YouTube, but we're live now. So I think he'll be there in just a moment. Just let's wait for a few minutes and he'll be there. Just transitioning to his office. Yeah, feel free to put the questions in the chat box if you want, and we're happy to take it up. It's really awfully nice of him to have tried to make the best of his journey and I think we discussed some vital pieces of information. We have till 5 o'clock, Deep.
Yeah, I mean, as of now, that's the plan. But I guess since we started a bit late with him, I'll request with him if he can stay on for another 10 minutes. Yeah, he's
played by the year. He is here as expected. Ladies and gentlemen, the play is about to resume. We're just going down to live action. There we are.
Yeah, sorry.
Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry for this transition.
Not at all. We expected it, and we are very thankful that you actually started it in your car. So thank you for doing that. Please continue, sir.
Yeah. So what I was saying was that the twin objectives for doing this was, one, to set up the institutional framework in the form of India Data Management Office and the India Data Council, which to bring together all the stakeholders for bringing the data that is available, and then setting up the data exchange platform. And this would really kind of facilitate the exchange of data between the between various Government of India entities, between Government of India and state government, and vice versa, as also with other entrepreneurs, private sector, and anyone. So primarily relates to non-personal data to begin with. So, but any data that the government has, as I mentioned, does have personal attributes, but when we make it open, it will be the non-personal data framework only. So that's the prime objective in a nutshell. And what it will result in is, of course, it will help us realize the vision of the data economy that we are trying to build up. So if there are people who want to use data that's available with regard to, say, crop surveillance, or with regard to agricultural yields, or with regard to agri markets or mandi prices, or the kind of what food, what crop are sold at what prices across the country at an aggregate level, this kind of information will be made available, and this can result in a lot of in multiple solutions that can be developed by startups and entrepreneurs. Similarly, in healthcare, the kind of data that we have we always find AI researchers and all asking for data sets. For example, we have heard about X-ray Setu being made, in which there was an app which was using X-rays to predict COVID-19, so that you don't require the high-cost CT scans. But the problem that they have is that they don't have access to the scans, to the X-ray scans, because they were working with only a limited number of data set that was made available. So this will enable them to access more data sets from several hospitals and then use it in for developing a solution. And we do feel that once this kind of ecosystem is developed and the kind of data set that will be made available, it will really kickstart the data economy, and it will allow database businesses to be set up, and it will allow development of AI solutions which can further be rolled out, scaled up, and the companies in India who will be developing this may find a place may find it an opportunity to replicate it elsewhere. So in short, this is the whole policy that is we have dealt with. You all have gone through that. So I would love to kind of make it more interactive, in which we can take questions and then we answer, so that we make it more contextual.
Sure, Abhishekji, I'm going to, well, firstly, thank you very much. Again, it's a heroic effort to do this in the car, in the lift, and then in the office, like a steeplechase VC. I haven't seen one like this before. Thank you for accommodating us. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Deepak Maheshwari, to do the interactive session. If I may ask you, we're at 4:37. Can you indulge us for a few minutes more in case the questions go over? How much time do you have? Because originally we were supposed to end at 5, but we're okay if you're short on time. Just let us know.
We can overshoot. We can overshoot by 15 minutes or so.
Right. Okay, so you have till about 5:10. Deepak, try and please end by then. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Deepak Maheshwari. Again, thank you, Abhishekji, for your opening remarks and for this multimedia performance today. Deepak.
Thanks, Virat, and thank you, Abhishekji, for this comprehensive overview, and also the historical aspect of about the National Data Sharing and Accessibility Policy 2012, which many people are not even aware, although even the background note does refer to that particular policy also. So here are a few questions based on what you just mentioned. So one question that has been raised by a lot of people, including many of our colleagues, is about what is a high value data set? So, I mean, this concept has been talked quite often, high value data set, even in the non-personal data committee's reports that came last year in December 2020, for that matter, and even in this particular draft policy. But I think it would be useful if you could give us, let's say, 3-4 examples of what that high value data set actually means. And also, what are the situations or contexts or circumstances under which a particular data set, which currently may not be a high value data set at this point of time, but might be qualifying as a high value data set in the near future based on whatever criteria are prescribed.
See, like when you look at the open data portal, the data.gov.in, so there what they do is that they classify a data set as a high value data set based on the number of users who are accessing that data set. So that becomes a very simple way of defining what a high value data set is. If any data set is being accessed by many people, then it can be classified as a high value data set. But what we feel in our consultations with industry and stakeholders is that might be only a small set of data set that's big, because that's coming from the data set which have already been published. There might be a lot of data sets which are not yet there, but which might be of value to somebody who needs them. So therein we see that, so there is again a concept of like what data set anybody is seeking for. And if there is some, if more number of people are seeking a data set, then that also becomes a high value data sets. Then the third attribute is that any data set which has got a lot of enrichment, a lot of value addition has been done in that, a lot of linking with other data sets has been done and evolved from there, that also becomes a high value data set. And another thing that this policy does is that it says that it will be doing a consultative process with industry and with researchers and with the stakeholders in order to gather what are the attributes that will define a high value data set. And we are also coming up of course the implementation guidelines is under the process of framing, but we are thinking of, can we come up to a regime wherein if anybody is seeking a data set which the government has, then can we make a commitment that yes, this data set will be either made available, or we'll say that it's not available for XYZ reason, but within a time frame. So just like an RTI is there for right to information, can we make a similar kind of provision for a right to data sets? So again, that's something that will come in the implementation guidelines once the policy is finalized.
Thank you. Actually, I was about to ask this particular aspect, so it seems that you are also mind reader of some sort, because ultimately we believe that the open data is actually in some way, if you see, is also a subset of the right to information itself overall. And even the Right to Information Act, of course, in the Section 4, it says that every agency will be publishing its all the information that is supposed to be in the public domain, in the electronic form. And India was unique to have this type of provision anywhere in the world for the first time. And to that extent, it is interesting to see that this particular draft policy actually uses the phrase open by default. I mean, these three words, I would say, are the most important, perhaps this. And of course, this whole thing around machine readability is another aspect, which currently many of the data sets which are in the public domain, however, suffer from this particular challenge that they are not machine readable really. So they could be PDF, they could be scans and other type of things. So that's one. Second thing was in terms of, for example, when we look at the JPC recommendation that came 3 months back, they are saying that it should be called a data protection bill now. And of course, the NPD, non-personal data regulation, should also be done under the same legislation, because the lines between the personal data and the non-personal data are blurring. So that was one specific observation from the JPC. And based on that, the draft bill has been revised. And in that respect, I just want to request you, when you are saying that this particular draft policy shall ensure that the privacy is not infringed, and especially by using certain type of anonymization tools and standards, etc. So what type of anonymization standards or tools are being considered? For example, something which could be used, let's say, as an encryption 10 years back, today that may not really be appropriate because technology itself keeps on changing. So what's going to be the type of standards and also the type of capacity building initiative, so that different agencies do have this type of determination, not only in terms of making the data public, but also having the capacity to determine about what is it that they should be doing and how to go about it?
The one thing is very clear that we are not stepping into the realm of personal data, because that's something which is under the jurisdiction of the parliament, and we are much away from that. But till such time the personal data protection bill becomes the law, till such time we also need a data governance framework for allowing data sharing, which sharing data which is non-personal in nature, which is aggregate in nature. So to that extent, this policy addresses that issue. But while doing so, what we realize that any data set which a government department has will have some personal attributes. So how do we enable that? So for making that on an open platform, for allowing anyone to share that, to have access to that, it will require the data anonymization and privacy preserving tools. And there are several such tools available today. Encryption is one of that. But if we talk to our technology team members, they say that there are tools available which would ensure that you cannot reverse engineer and find out the person's identity with that. So those anonymization tools will be made available to all government departments. They will be trained in using that, and they will also be given exposure in what is the value that they can get by doing that. The second part is that which we are debating with, which we are like currently kind of discussing with, what about certain data sets which might be having some personal attributes, but might be required to be sharing within government departments. One use case here is that suppose every government department implements multiple schemes. Rural development is implementing a scheme for rural employment guarantee program. Some department is implementing a scheme for rural housing. Somebody is giving health, is giving the health insurance, the Ayushman Bharat scheme, and food and public distribution is giving ration cards. And all these schemes are meant for the poor and the needy. So if one department has done the due diligence and identified somebody to be a beneficiary under one government scheme, and the requirements, eligibility conditions of any other scheme is something similar, then should that department again spend time and resource and energy for identifying the beneficiary again? Or can we come up with a system in which if the Manrega database is made available, accessible to say the Ayushman Bharat database, and Ayushman Bharat does a check that are there any beneficiaries there in that database which are not my beneficiaries? And can I proactively offer that service to the citizen? If we, so you understand what I mean? The impact and potential of this will be immense. So we can always think of creating a system in which government departments start offering services on their own. If we know that from the every state government issues caste certificates, if we know that there are certain groups of people who are identified to belong to certain communities or castes or religious groups which are eligible for, say, a scholarship, and the education database knows that these are the kids who are belonging to that category and they are studying in school and they're eligible for a scholarship, then should we have a scholarship form, or should the government match these databases and say that, yes, we know that you are studying in this group, you are eligible for a scholarship, we give that. So this interlinking of databases and sharing of information will make governance much more accessible and easier for citizens. And instead of citizens applying and running after government departments to get what is rightfully theirs, they will be getting what they are entitled for without they seeking that. And then we are also, of course, building it into another framework in which citizens will be able to identify what all they are eligible for based on their profile. Because very often we mapped almost 300 plus schemes, and we found that many citizens for whom these schemes are designed for are themselves not even aware that there is a scheme which does that, which will give them irrigation support, or which will give them some kind of other support in agriculture or horticulture or any other animal husbandry, any other department. So what we have done is that we have built up a simple engine wherein you enter your demographic profile, the place where you belong to, your age, and other basic data, and the system will throw up, yes, you will be eligible for these XYZ schemes. And then it will also tell you how to apply, how to access those services and avail of that. So two things it's going to do. One is this kind of data sharing framework. One, it will allow government departments to proactively deliver services. It will allow citizens to easily discover services and apply for that. And also it has the potential ultimately of building something called a need score for citizens. Just like we have a credit rating score or a CIBIL score in which it determines whether you are eligible for a credit loan or something. Similarly, for citizens also, this entire data sharing framework can ultimately result in building something what we call a need score. And once we know that who is more needy, then if there are shortage of resources, then a policy formulation can be done. How do we allocate those resources in order to ensure the requirements of the most needy are met? So these are the certain things that will happen once these things are done. But to do all of it, we do need the data anonymization tools, the privacy preservation tools, as you rightfully said. And this whole endeavor is in building up the data management units, in supporting the chief data officers in various departments with professional data analysts and data scientists, will help them understand how to share data, what to share, what tools to use, in what format to share, how do you have common data standards and metadata standards so that data becomes interoperable and shareable, and all of it will be ensured through the capacity building initiative of that. So this is what, yeah.
Okay, so this seems like a very interesting paradigm shift, as you just mentioned, that instead of individuals trying to find out and sort of struggling and chasing the government, okay, that these are my entitlement and am I eligible, etc. Here is a total reversal of that whole paradigm, in the sense that now the government is saying that, okay, these are the things which are available, and these are the ways in which it can be discovered. These are the ways in which you can even self-assess in some way to whether you qualify or not, and to what extent. And if you do qualify, okay, this is the way to actually avail of these type of services. So in that respect, now I just want to turn a little bit to my colleague Tanmoy here. And he also has some question very specifically related to the use of IT in the governance overall. Yeah, Tanmoy.
No, thank you, Deepak, and thank you, Abhishek, for being with us this afternoon. My question is that, yes, of course, these are two very good initiatives that you're taking, the formation of the policy-making body and the administering body, if I can differentiate the two bodies that you described in terms of the functions that they will have. My question was more about the standards and, to be able to bring accessibility of data, which is in vast quantities available in the government. There needs to be some kind of interoperable standards or some kind of platforms from where the data can be accessed, for which then that can be used for developing more applications which can be data centric. So what are some of the thoughts of the government in rationalizing many of the databases which exist today? I mean, for example, I was just talking a little while ago before you joined, as an individual citizen, even if you just take the central government, for example, every ministerial database has information about me. And this is a multiplicity of databases, whereas the basic tenet of IT is to be able to leverage from a single source of truth. So is there any moves in those directions that first let us put the foundation in order, which is to bring data consolidation, and then we talk about data governance and the administering of the data? Is there any kind of a chronological sequence to such foundational activities before we move on to the next level of maturity? That's my question.
Very rightfully said. In fact, that's something that's required. In fact, we have been working on a concept like ask only once. Like once the government department knows something about a citizen, why should any other government department ask the citizen to give the same information again or prove that information to be correct or not? And in some format, we have started, we did something similar to, you are familiar with the Passport Seva project. So in Passport Seva project, we did this, the date of birth and the address. We said that if it is available in my DigiLocker, then it's already available. We have already verified from various sources on the documents which are there in DigiLocker. So today, when you apply for the passport, you can choose that option, pull my date of birth and address from my DigiLocker. You just authorize while applying. So the consent is taken. And then that piece of information is pulled into your application from the DigiLocker. So you don't need to submit any documents which are required to prove your date of birth or to prove your address. So that's kind of one example in which it has been done. But what it needs to be done, it needs to be done across various departments, because every department is trying to do that. And if for a citizen, it's a lot of hardship. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of resource, a waste of energy, and results in a lot of harassment if you have to prove what you are at every single place. Unfortunately, we do have Aadhaar as an identifier in many databases. There are certain issues with regard to where Aadhaar can be used or whether Aadhaar cannot be used based on the Puttaswamy judgment. But there also what we have found is that if it is a consent-based system, if we take the consent of the citizen, that would he like to share his Aadhaar for linking databases, and then he is saved from the hardship of submitting multiple documents or notarized or affidavits or statements or personal appearances, then many citizens give that consent. So once that consent is taken and that information is shared, then what you asked is going to be a reality. So that's so all that I can say is that ask only once is a philosophy that we are working on, and it has already been done in Aadhaar by integrating with DigiLocker, and we are trying to make Aadhaar and DigiLocker as the kind of basic building block with which this integration of databases will be ensured. And this will be done through publication of APIs. API level verifications is possible there. And even for academic credentials, we have done that. Like, as you know, DigiLocker is also the National Academic Depository, and we have access, and it stores the academic credentials. 10th and 12th, and now even higher education is being stored there. So very often when people are applying for universities or applying for jobs, you need to verify their academic credentials. So do you need to submit your attested certificates to the college? No, you can easily do a API-based verification from the DigiLocker. And last year, in fact, we were able to do this also when the Delhi University admissions were taking place. And because of the pandemic, the students were not able to come to the colleges. Then we set up a mechanism in which API-based verification of credentials was done. And no student was required to submit any paper certificates or even PDFs in an on-application form. Similarly, Karnataka Police has been doing recruitments in which they have done this API-based verification of academic credentials. So what I feel is that while we have a few examples here and there, but these needs to become the norm, this needs to become the policy of ensuring access to documents through APIs with a consent-based framework.
So there's another question which is related to two other types of data. One is the data which is, let's say, non-human data. So the government also has a lot of non-human data. So it could be, let's say, about the topography, it could be about the road infrastructure or anything like that. So which doesn't have any privacy implication as such, but it's still very important. So one type of non-personal data. The other type of data within the government, as well as, of course, in the private sector, as well as with the individuals, is unstructured or, let's say, non-digital data. So there's a lot of data in the government also, which is still in the paper form, the old legacy data. There's also a lot of data with the government, which is in unstructured form. So this is not really in terms of databases, but that could be, let's say, in a written text or something like that. So what attempts are being made and what is the strategy for bringing that type of data, both the unstructured, the analog, as well as the non-human data within this realm of data sharing platforms and other policies that you're talking about?
See, that would require a lot of effort in digitization and data annotation and trying to make data that is available in unstructured form to be made accessible and for anyone who is accessing that to make sense of that. For example, there might be maps, like many states have done land record digitization, but they also have a lot of maps which gives details of various plots of land or industrial information systems, which gives details of areas wherein investments can be made. So some work has been done. In fact, we worked with the Department of Promotion of DPIIT, wherein the industrial information system was built up, which digitized all the land that is available for investors to procure land, get details about that, how far it is available from a railhead or an airport. This kind of information has been done. Similarly, the other departments who are there, what we have found is that they do have the willpower or the intent to do it, but somehow they do not have the capability or the teams who will be able to do that. So to that extent, the data management units and the chief data officers who are being strengthened in the various departments, they will have to look into that. And once they determine that there is some data set which is of high value, which can create some which might be useful for someone, is available in an unstructured format. So they will have to take up this exercise and work with the right tools in order to make the unstructured data available.
So there's another, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, Virat, I just have one more question and then I'll just.
Please, yeah, there are two questions here. So after
sure. Yeah. So one question is related to the accountability of the private sector. So in case the government does share some data sets with the private sector, so what is the type of accountability framework would be in place there? And second thing is in terms of the aspect of monetization. So for example, the revenue generation by way of data sharing itself. So some people also have concerns around this monetization aspect of it. So briefly, if you could address these, and then I'll shift to what Virat has some questions.
See, when we talk of monetization, first and foremost, I want to make clear that the intent of bringing out this policy by the government is not revenue maximization, because that's a very small way to look at it. If we do that, the kind of impact that will be created, value that will be created once that data is made open, is much more than the revenue that can be generated for that. While the only reason because of which the data licensing frameworks and all have been mentioned in the policy is that very often there are certain departments who feel that they have invested a lot in creating these data sets, and they feel that anyone who gets access to these data sets may generate a lot of money from there. So we need to first think of that, is generating a lot of money a good thing or a bad thing? So if we say that data is the new oil and data can create a lot of value, data has the potential of helping us reach to the $1 trillion digital economy. But then that data has to be made available for anyone to make use of that. As long as we are doing it in a fair manner, in an open manner, and not making it available to a few people and not to everyone, that would be wrong. So if we have to make it open, it should be freely accessible by each one and everyone. And if the department feels that they have invested some money, and in order to make the data enrichment process continue, they need certain resources, then they can come up with some licensing framework wherein they can say that this data set will be available, but you have to contribute this much. But then that we have left to the wisdom of the concerned departments. Will come up with certain model policies for doing that, but the objective will be that not to get lost in trying to create value by pricing the data set pre-novo at the beginning only. Just make that data set available, and the value that we created will result in a lot of indirect revenue realization for the government in the long term.
Sure. So, okay. So over to Virat, and this was very interesting to see that this whole thing about the second and third order effects, which is what the value addition would actually be generating. So Virat, you had a question.
I actually have questions from the participants, and I'm going to direct them to Abhishek ji. One is, there's a lot of data that comes in from the states, or as you mentioned in your opening remarks, retained by the states. What is the proposal to ensure that the states upload the data in real time? While you're looking at time limit for data, how can we ensure the long-term trend data for analysis?
See, like we have already a few states like Karnataka, Telangana, Sikkim, Odisha, Punjab, who have notified their own open data policies, and they have come up with their own frameworks for data sharing. And more states are doing that. So there is a kind of a consensus at policy level wherein most state governments do feel that in order to create value from data, we need to make it available and accessible. But while doing so, if each state starts doing in their own way and starts trying to have their own metadata standards and all, there might be a possibility that data from various states might not talk to each other. So to that extent, the India Data Council and the India Data Office seeks to bring everyone on the same page and ensure that whatever is done, whatever each state, the data that each state is holding on, they follow the standard protocols for making that available. The owners of the data will remain the concerned state governments as long as it's generated from their initiatives, but they would be expected to follow the standard protocols so that data is interoperable and shareable in a common framework. With regard to ensuring time series of data, yes, there will be some states which would have done digitization up to a particular year, but there might have many states which do not have data beyond a particular year in a digitized format. So there will be some variation that will exist in for some time. That maybe agriculture data will be available from 2015, healthcare data will be available from 2010, census data might be available for much longer. So, but that inconsistency we'll have to live with it for the time being. But as long as we go ahead, in prospectively speaking, if all data sets start following that protocol, then in the future, all data will be available for anyone to access on a data exchange platform.
Thank you. I have another question. It's a very specific question that relates to the National Cancer, sorry, just went off. National Cancer Registry. In India, population-based cancer registry covered less than 15% of the urban and only 1% of the rural population. How can we have a streamlined system to develop robust national cancer registry? It's a very specific question. You might want to answer it directly or in generic terms.
See, I would say that I'm just thinking, see, we all are aware of the digital health mission that is being implemented by the National Health Authority. And therein also they have looked into the prospects of they're building up the doctor registries, the health facility registries, and they're looking at the data sets pertaining to various diseases. So I'm sure it would come under the purview of health, and National Cancer Registry able to access that. But I would not have the technical details with regard to what kind of data sets you are thinking of and what kind of frameworks you are looking for.
Thank you. There's other questions here. Srinivas from Helen Knowlton says it's a very timely session. Thank you. And Swati says, she asked the question about how do you plan to integrate the large amount of non-digital data?
This is similar to what Deepak asked with regard to the unstructured data. So the non-digital data will need to be, like, if you have to make it accessible, it will have to be digitized at some level or the other. So again, depending on the value that is attached to a data set, the concerned department will need to take up the digitization exercises. But when they do the digitization, they will need to ensure that they properly index it, they make it searchable, they follow formats which are open, which are shareable. So those guidelines and tool sets for digitizing such data sets will be made available by India Data Office. And if a data set is perceived to be of high value and useful, then hopefully it should be available in digital format very soon.
There's another comment here, which I think you've answered. A forward-looking policy with a word of caution attempts at revenue generation from public databases. Monetization of anonymized personal data by the government requires diligence in a legal framework, which are clearly lacking currently. The government attempts at monetizing of such data have not met with success. How do you hope to overcome that? I know you've stated that the objective of this is not to revenue maximize, but if you could just respond to that broader question.
See, yes, this is a risk that the government runs into whenever we do that. In fact, we came up with this policy not with the objective of revenue maximization, but yes, we found editorials and Internet Freedom Foundation coming up with newspaper op-eds and articles saying that government is selling personal data. So again, I would like to emphasize that the intent is not to monetize, not to generate revenue. The intent is not that. The intent is only that all datasets should be open by default, which says that most datasets should be available without any cost for anyone. But in case there is any government department which feels that they need to recover the investments that they have made for making the dataset available, or in order to ensure that they need to continuously make it available, that provision has been made for data licensing and coming up with a policy wherein some pricing can be done. But yes, if based on the feedback, based on the consultations, this is just a consultative process. If we get this input that this is not required or not a mature thing to do at this stage, then it may be dropped. Though the NDSAP policy, the National Data Sharing and Access Policy, way back in 2012, mentioned that data can be priced, data can be monetized. But somehow, since it was never implemented in either letter or spirit, we never thought of that. Since this policy mentioned that, again, some people have noticed it, and it's becoming quite a. If it becomes a big issue, then we are willing to drop it, because that's not the purpose for which the policy has been framed.
Thank you. Another delegate has posted 3 questions. One seems to be by way of a comment. I'm going to the questions regarding data transfer, especially between private and public sector. How does the government envisage the private sector accountability? And I'll say the second question as well, or I can wait, and then after you responded, I can go to that question.
See, this policy at the moment is only related to making the public data available and accessible. We are not going into the larger data, private data sharing policy, because that is again part of the data protection bill. So right now we are just saying that how does the government share the data that it has within itself, because many, I don't know if all you are aware or not, but sharing data within the government also is quite a challenge. So we are to get something from food and public distribution or from drinking water is not easy. So first and foremost, within the government departments, sharing of data will be easy, which will help us in enabling better public services and bringing in more accountability and improving governance. That's the prime objective. And over and above that, once this data set is made available to startups and entrepreneurs and researchers, more value from the data sets can be generated, because there might be applications or services that an entrepreneur or a startup may think of, which we in the government might not even imagine that this is possible by bringing together several data sets together. So we are looking forward to the enterprise of the Indian startups and entrepreneurs to create more value for that. But for doing that, the public data sets have to be made available for them to play with it and for them to create valuable products out of that. So this time, right now, we are not going into the framework of sharing of private data sets with the government or otherwise. Yeah.
There's one more. I think you've answered this. This relates to governance around foreign-owned entities operating in India, implications with regard to data access and usage. I think you've spoken about the fact that the focus is on that. I'm going to turn to one more. I think we have time for one last one. After a private sector player accesses open data and does its own value addition, will it be considered as proprietary data? And secondly, what are the risks identified by government in this regard, in general, but in this regard?
Okay, so if private sector entrepreneur uses it and uses it for, maybe he can, I don't know. What would you think? This question requires some thinking. Like, yeah. So I would look forward to any views, suggestions. Like, yes, if he has put in some value and created value from that data, then he doesn't become a public authority. So I cannot force him to share that data onto the realm. If he willing to share,
question is more about where does the IP sit on this? Like, does it become proprietary or this?
See, if the intent of the government is to make this data set available, then what anybody does with it, like for example, SkyMet. What does SkyMet do? They take the data set from the IMD. Most of the data sets are from the IMD, which is again available in public domain. They create value for it and then they made it available and they price it and sell it and create products from there. So, but can I force SkyMet to make whatever they have done, they have developed to be available in a open and free format? Maybe not. Otherwise, we will be killing private enterprise.
Lots of responsibility, lots of important questions, early stage discussions. We are very thankful for your, I'm just going to turn to my colleague Tanmoy for closing remarks. But I was going to say that, you know, whether the data is oil or not, that jury is out. But if it's mishandled, it can certainly be toxic. So that part is already well known. So we should be careful about how this is being handled. I'm going to turn to my colleague Tanmoy. But before I do that, my personal thanks to you, Abhishek ji, for making the time and being with us today. Tanmoy.
Thank you, Virat. And as always, it's been a very, very invigorating session. There were so many questions that itself manifests the fact that there was very acute attention on this subject, which is extremely relevant and coming up in the future as India and the whole technology platform of governance improves and matures more and more as we go along. And I've had the privilege of working with Abhishek in the past in many, many areas. And clearly, this is a subject that he has now taken responsibility of, where I believe that order needs to come from the chaos, if I can use that terminology. This is the state at which we are in right now. And Abhishek's responsibility is to really bring order and to be able to have that information availability openness that any democracy it is one of the important attributes of a democracy to have open data, especially data that is within the government. So I congratulate you for taking up this initiative, Abhishek, and thank you so much for giving your views on the two foundational pillars that you're actually setting up. And I think more significantly, the capacity that you're injecting into the departments by creating that chief data officer position. That kind of input is very much required because it is a very, very nascent subject for every ministry and every department. And I think that kind of a domain specialist input would go a long way in kind of, initially bringing in that parity and that cohesiveness that would be required to be able to mature the data as well as to be able to make it available for public consumption. And he would, or he or she would actually be a very significant bridge between the process. So congratulations for thinking through some of that. And I also really appreciate your openness where you are still looking for feedback and as you kind of, mold your way along to bring out the first version. And I'm sure it is going to be a continuously evolutionary process because it is early days for India. One of the things that certainly we need some transparency about, and this is a direct specific input to you, Abhishek, is we as citizens need to know about the MP-led fund consumption by our publicly elected representatives. It is time that the government actually sets up a portal where you have a real-time information system of what each elected representative, not just in the central government, but also in the state governments, to be able to then score their elected representatives with what they are doing with the public exchequer money that they are being allocated on a yearly basis. A tenure of an MP of 5 years gives him 30 crores of rupees to spend as MP lad. So what is he doing about it? I think today no citizen knows what is actually being done with it. So just a suggestion that I think we as citizens would be very curious to know what's going on. And this could be one of the first available information systems that you could pilot on this open data governance platform that you're suggesting. So on behalf of PAFI, I thank you once again for your valuable time. You valiantly navigated through the Krishi Mantralaya to the car to your own office. And we really compliment you for this effort. And thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts. I also thank all the participants who contributed with their questions. Very, very intense session. And wish everybody a very safe and happy Holi as we come along to the Holi weekend. And we also hope that there is peace and prosperity in other parts of the world where today there is so much of suffering and pain. So with these words, I want to thank you again, Abhishek, for your time, and thank all the panelists and the participants for joining this session. And we will look forward to the next PAFI dialogue, which is a continuum as we have in the whole throughout the year. And thank everybody for their participation this evening. Thank you once again and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Bye.
Please feel free to give your comments on the policy through
Sure.
email also. Yeah.
Would there be any extension? I just want to check, because I know as of now it is 18th. As of now it is 18th of March. I know that. But just wanted to check.
There could be, because we are also planning.
Okay.
We were also actually planning physical consultative meet,
Okay.
in which
Alright.
apart from online and virtual, we also wanted to get people in an interactive session, which our honorable ministers also wanted to join in. So
Sure.
Unfortunately, we could not do it in the last week or so because of elections and many other parliament and all beginning. But we'll be doing so before we finalize the policy. It will be a proper consultative process, so that very often we are said to make policies without consulting people. But this is something that we will need to consult each one and everyone in order to make sure that we come up with something which is implementable and which is useful.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, if you have closed this session without asking for an action, who seemed like we did not sing for our supper. So, we absolutely